Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of All Access. And as usual, I'm dealing with some AV issues at the last moment, but I think it's working now. So welcome on board again. And there's a lot to discuss today. I think something that's on everyone's minds is exactly how this field will evolve, exactly how we're going to see blockchains change character, and most importantly, exactly how we're going to reach the next billion users with legitimate backing people behind the scenes with actual institutional support for blockchains. So to discuss that, I brought two of the best people in this field that I know, and I'd like to bring them on board. One is Morgan Krupetsky. She works with me at Avalanche. Welcome on board, Morgan.
Thanks very
Hi.
much. Thanks for having me.
And the other one is Luigi DeMeo, also from Avalanche. Hi, Luigi.
Hey guys, happy to be here.
Great to have you guys. So today what we're going to do is a bit of a role reversal because what I normally do is proselytize about the Avalanche vision, proselytize about how we see the blockchain space evolving, and I think we have a pretty good track record of calling out things before they happen. And it's been kind of fun watching everybody else come to where we were 2 years ago consistently for about 2.5 years now. And so think of it as postcards from the front. And so I brought to you two of the people at the very forwardmost trenches of blockchain adoption. And what I think I want to do today is take the back seat. I don't want to talk about subnets anymore. Just want to be asking the questions. And I would like to hear from people who've been talking to the institutions, who've been proselytizing to the very people that we want to come into the space. I want to hear their views. I want to hear their opinions. I want to hear their observations. So I'm going to spare all of you the typical stuff that you've heard from me. And instead, we're going to listen to Morgan and Luigi share with us how they see subnets evolving. So let's just start by asking the obvious question. In your own words, what is an Avalanche subnet? What does it bring to the table?
I think I'll open up here. So subnets, basically the first time I ever came across the concept was in the initial white paper. I don't know, what is it now, Goon? Four years ago or so?
4 years, I think. It's been 4 years.
So the notion is simple for me. It provides the ability for anybody to have their own blockchain, but at even a simpler level, it actually is just really a collection of some validators who agree to validate something, anything. And in this case, really, what they're validating is an L1, for lack of better terms. So that people can build their own blockchains, they can customize them on many levels, whether that's the virtual machine level, whether that is the validator level, whether that's customizing the jurisdictions of the validators, whether that's permissioning or non-permissioning. Basically, what you have is a very general framework that people can build upon to have their own blockchains. And I think it was pretty. Go ahead, dude.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, I think it was pretty, really thought out well in the sense that the path hasn't really been paved, and people don't really know what everybody's going to be doing with blockchain in the next 10 years, let's say. But the framework that the network and the architecture allows is one that people can customize basically at the subnet level, and you're seeing that, and institutional adoption is one use case of that I think Morgan has a lot of really good insights into.
So before we branch out to that side, I want to dissect this word a little bit. Are subnets subservient in any way? Are they limited? Are they under the governance or under the control of the main chain in any shape or form?
They're not. Subnets are their own isolated networks, effectively. So they have their own validator sets. If they are permissionless, they have a staking token that the validators choose to stake to validate for the proof of stake of the network. If they're permissioned, they don't necessarily have to stake a token, but they can have validator weights that are agreed upon beforehand. So that's actually something that is completely determined by the subnet creator, whomever that might be.
I think that's a really interesting and important question that you brought up, because this, part of my role, I mean, I speak with kind of the whole spectrum of financial services institutions, from banks, asset managers, hedge funds, private equity firms, venture funds, and then liquid token funds. And a major part of my role is education and awareness. And this question comes up a lot, like what are subnets? Are subnets an L2? Is it part of the network? How does it fit in with the broader network? And so a lot of it is just a lot of education, basically clarifying that subnets collectively make up the Avalanche network, right? We always describe Avalanche as a blockchain of blockchains or network of networks. And I think in terms of just the target state vision that you all had from inception was always that, you know, mass adoption wouldn't happen on one single monolithic chain. Like, it's crazy to think from a practical standpoint that, for example, like a Taylor Swift NFT drop would be able to impede upon the performance of a multi-billion-dollar loan transaction between two institutions. So this concept of subnets is the thing that basically allows the network to scale horizontally by basically adding more and custom blockchains. And we can kind of talk about, you know, the specifics from a financial services standpoint, but you know, I think the team has always realized that if you're a gaming company or if you're a financial institution or if you're a government agency, your specific use case for blockchain is obviously going to be very different. And therefore, your particular chain or subnet is also going to have to be customized for that particular use case. So I think that's extremely powerful when you're looking really across the gamut in terms of different industries, verticals, and use cases.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. That's exactly that's a fantastic point. And from a technical perspective, the word subnet is one that has existed in networking literature for I don't know how many decades. And there is nothing subservient about a subnet in networking literature as well. So you have subnets, that just means that it's hanging off in some sense from another network. You can do whatever you want in that, in your local network. You can do things that the main network that you're connected to cannot do. All of that translates into the blockchain space and Avalanche subnets as well. So you can have a subnet that can do things that the main network it's hanging off of, the P chain, cannot do. In fact, we do this all the time. Every single other network, the C chain, for example, implements the EVM. That's not something that the P chain does. The X chain implements the AVM, not something that the P chain does. The Spaces VM does something completely different. So each and every one of our subnets can do and does do something that the chains that it's connected to cannot do. That's normal. That's quite good, and that's part of the solution to this expandability, this flexibility. So, okay, so let's sort of. I want to just get that technical point in about subnets, etc. But let's move on and let's focus on Avalanche Evergreen. So we announced this recently. I talked about it a little bit, and I gave sort of a high-level sketch of how it works, what it's trying to do, etc. But in your own words, what is an Avalanche Evergreen subnet?
Sure. So I'll start. Luigi, feel free to jump in. But I think in general, from an institutional standpoint, in talking to what feels like an infinity amount of institutions over the past year, I think many of them have kind of either come to the conclusion or are coming to the conclusion that like the target state vision for blockchain infrastructure is benefiting from and in some way on benefiting from in some way on public blockchain infrastructure and benefiting from public blockchain development. But that's not to say that, you know, just because a specific use case is using that particular institution can obfuscate existing laws, rules, and regulations, internal considerations around compliance, so on and so forth. And so historically, before the advent of Avalanche and the capabilities, institutions have historically chosen to build on what we call enterprise blockchains. So think about examples like Hyperledger, Corda, Quorum, that basically had them owning the entire environment within their internal servers. And so in this way, for a variety of reasons, limited a lot of the interoperability and composability and really blockchain development that has come particularly over the past few years.
Okay, hang on, Morgan. Yeah. I want to interrupt you for a second, and sure. I want to expand on this. Every single person listening to us right now knows about the myriad of proofs of concept that people have built on Hyperledger, on Corda, and other permission chains. I think of all of those, only a single one went to production, and that was the Whopper coin. Remember Whopper coin for Burger King? And it was built on Bitcoin NG. Anyway, but that's another protocol I designed prior to Avalanche. But essentially, of the literally hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 different proofs of concept, not a single one saw the light of day. And I can't point to any single one of those episodes and say that was a great success. So why do you think that failure was? I think you just alluded to that. I want to expand on this. And why do you think subnets differ from that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it's for a variety of reasons. I think in the first instance, it's hard to, as one single institution driving one initiative, get other industry participants, other clients onto kind of using your singular platform, right? And so in a certain way, just like the pure enterprise chains kind of defeats the purpose of blockchain. Like you might as well have like an internal database at that point. So I think back then also there was really only two options, right? Public and permissionless, and private and permissioned, and kind of no in between. And so with that, you know, kind of what I alluded to earlier, you therefore lose all of this great interoperability and composability, and frankly, like the developer community and the innovations that they bring by kind of bringing everything kind of in-house and closing off your use case to kind of the outside world, the industry, so on and so forth. Luigi, I don't know if there's anything you would add, but I think that's kind of what we've observed.
Yeah, one other more, maybe a little bit more of a macro point. I think when you have revolutionary technology that really comes to the forefront, you have a lot of existing and legacy businesses that aren't necessarily, or they're not fully willing to adopt the technology in its current or pure form, I would say. Right? They're trying to make certain trade-offs. They're trying to carve out certain parts of their businesses, and in that process, they start to tear away at some parts of the actual technology. And I think that's what we saw predominantly in the last cycle, where people were trying to maintain core parts of their businesses with this technology. And really what they ended up with was something that was very similar to the legacy technology, didn't take the good parts of what we have now. And now you're starting to see that change, though. I think people have really, like you could see, like from the institutions we've spoken to, there are the ones who were there last cycle, and there are the ones who are not. And the ones that were there last cycle have learned a lot. They've really learned a lot. And in that process, they understand the core benefits of this technology, which we could talk a lot more about today. And that's becoming obvious at this point, I think.
Yeah, I think let's go back to this topic of interoperability later on. I think in the last cycle, we heard a lot about interoperability. And on the podcast in the early days, I would essentially make the point that, hey, these folks are essentially saying you are interoperable as long as you adopt my protocol in full. And in some cases, they were proposing a layer on top of multiple chains. And in those cases, it's as, you know, they try to pitch this as it's as good as the sum of all of these. But in reality, it turns up, you end up being able to export only that functionality that is the least common denominator across all of them. So you end up being as bad as the worst of them. So those are all things that I observed from my personal vantage point. But let's move on and get back to what we were discussing, which is the Avalanche evergreen subnets. And Morgan, sorry to interrupt, but I'll do this a bunch because this is how I like to talk, and I think these shorter snippets are more fun for people to follow anyway. So let's get back to the main topic at hand. So Avalanche green subnets, you were discussing their properties and what they offer to institutions.
Yeah, so I mean, we've established that, you know, historically a lot of these institutions have been used to building on enterprise chains, and in having conversations with them, it started kind of coming out that there were commonalities in terms of what was important to them from a permissioning, from a privacy standpoint. And so, you know, by the time we got to like the fourth or fifth conversation, you know, the aha moment was, oh, subnets can actually provide me with the ability to address a lot of these internal and industry-wide considerations, but at the same time allow me to benefit from, you know, public blockchain infrastructure development, interoperability, and composability. So basically, subnets give institutions the best of both worlds. And so what we did was, you know, rather than have to go through 4 or 5 meetings and iterations and conversations to get to this point, we thought, hey, most institutions want these X amount of features. Let's create a product called Avalanche Evergreen to basically present an out-of-the-box template or subnet product for financial institutions. And obviously can be customized up or down from there, but at least like a baseline implementation for a subnet. And so included in those things are kind of 4 things. At this point, EVM-based, EVM compatibility. That's what institutions currently want and are kind of working on. Obviously, that can continue to evolve down the line, but EVM is the first and foremost kind of feature. The second is embedded user permissioning, notably as expressed or manifest through KYC or KYB, meaning, if you're a bank and you have clients that, are already onboarded, i.e. they're already KYC'd, you can create a wallet for them and create an allow list at the chain level. And that's the thing that will basically gate access to your subnet and all of the kind of applications deployed on that subnet. The third is validator permissioning. At this point, most institutions want to ensure that their subnet is permissioned or is permissioned from a validator standpoint. In some cases, institutions are interested in validating their own subnets. In others, they'd like a third party to do it. In others, it's kind of a combination, but the ability to control your validator set for a variety of different considerations. Some care about KYCing their validators. Others also care about where their validators are based jurisdictionally. So obviously all of that can be implemented from a validator standpoint. And then the last thing, which is also very important, is the custom gas token. Many banks at this point cannot hold crypto on their balance sheets. So they have alternatives. They have options. They can create a custom gas token, whether it's a bank issued stablecoin to power the transactions on their network, or it can be a valueless token to power the transaction. So all of these things are kind of embedded into evergreen subnets as a kind of an out-of-the-box feature. And we can go into talking about Spruce, which is an example of the evergreen subnet. But essentially, institutions are looking at evergreens to either power their ready-made in production use cases and basically transport them over from their enterprise chains. Or a lot of them are looking at them as kind of like sandbox environments where they can use this evergreen subnet to test out whatever use case, whether it's tokenization or DeFi or some combination of both. But in this environment that, gives them the comfort that it's a controlled environment, but, has the optionality to always kind of open up from there. So I said a lot.
Yeah, I think that, one thing that's become quite clear is that institutions in particular throughout the conversations weren't exactly sure with what exactly they were looking for in terms of the technology. So once we started to explain the possibility of subnets, it felt a lot similar to what they were looking for with enterprise chains, but with key components and advantages that they didn't have. And those key components and advantages are pretty clear. One is, in particular, connectability to other chains, which are other subnets effectively. 2, leverage to other exchange integrations, other types of native assets, right? So if you think about the Avalanche architecture, you have the C chain, right? The C chain has a bunch of integrations, right? Native USDC, native USDT, exchange integrations with Coinbase, et cetera, Chainlink feeds, all these types of hard infrastructure, really. Well, subnets can actually leverage all this infrastructure, and they can do it with a native built-in bridge called Avalanche Warm Messaging, AWM. I know we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but the reality is that if I'm a subnet, I want to be able to actually leverage a lot of these integrations. And so I can pull from the C chain. Not only that, but also some institutions really want to maintain privacy of their own network, especially during exploration times. So while they're exploring with their own network, they may not want to be doing this on a permissionless chain or a public chain where others can actually sort of see what's going on, right? It's transparent in many ways, especially the EVM. So that was another component that was clear about evergreen subnets. And the last is really just compliance. Some of these institutions just do not have the ability to partake in this technology in any way if they don't have actual permissioning. He's back.
I don't know where to begin. I don't know what you guys said when I was gone. I hope you had fun. I hate this technology. My subnet clearly is
I was going to say, which technology?
it's IP technology. It's my connectivity obviously is having issues. I'm sorry that my network gave up on me for no reason whatsoever. Might do this again. It does this every now and then. And I'm not going to name the name of my carrier, but they've been having issues lately.
We were just talking about sort of the benefits that subnets get from integrations and connectivity with each other, but also with the C chain, where a lot of integrations are. So the benefit of having a subnet that has all the customizability of an enterprise chain, plus you get the open source development, right, and hardening of the code. A lot of people working on the same thing at once. In addition, you also get leverage to the integrations and native assets that are on something like the C chain in particular.
Right, exactly. So I want to let's ask some questions on this front. So if I want to create a blockchain and I want to I want to make available to my users the benefits of a programmable platform, a transparent platform, the ability to write snippets of code, the ability to provide a democratic, equal, even playing field for everyone, etc. I want all the blockchain goodness. Do I have to issue my own token to do this?
No, you don't. I also like the term blockchain goodness. I think I'm just going to start using that. It's very descriptive. But I mean, obviously, no, you don't. And I think those are some examples that we kind of went over where, we were saying, especially for banks, where they at this point can't hold crypto, right? And so they don't have to. In some cases, a lot of banks these days are actually working on, stable coins. And so in that sense, that could be an option in terms of powering the transactions on their respective subnet.
So hang on. Are you talking about paying gas in a stablecoin then?
Yeah.
That's cool.
JPM coin, for example, right? That already exists as a tokenized deposit of a bank. There's no reason that couldn't be a gas token powering a subnet.
Right. Has anyone done that, by the way?
A bank with their own, sort of.
The bank. Any system that allows you to pay gas with a stable coin.
Is that a rhetorical question?
Huh?
Only Spruce.
No, other than this effort. Look, I've been very busy building stuff, and I haven't followed the competition, but I know you guys have.
Yeah.
So, have you seen anything similar in any other system?
I haven't seen. I mean, Luigi, feel free to jump in. I haven't seen anything similar in another system. I mean, there's our Spruce, which we can talk about, but not in terms of competing systems.
A lot of the enterprise solutions are actually gasless in some form or fashion, and that's because they put a lot more permissioning at either the contract level or the user level, and thus there's really not a concern of sort of spamming of the network. But that's a little.
I worry about that. I think those systems are as yet untested.
Yeah.
So and you can't really avail yourself of blockchain goodness, so to speak, if you try to control all of the ingress points. So I think what Luigi is saying is, well, they try to control all of the ingress, and therefore they do spam control at the ingress, and then they don't have to charge you. But then that's not an open system. Yeah. So the whole benefit of having a blockchain goes out the door the moment you make it a closed system with typically a singular entity at the door. And so then why are you doing this? It's just the old world with more complications now. So I think we're going to see that as those systems are truly tested, they're either closed and are deficient in many ways, or they actually have DOS vulnerabilities that have not yet been tested and taken advantage of. That's at least my take. So I've made a bunch of predictions of this kind, and they're falsifiable. And every single one has come to pass. I'm feeling like I should go on a prediction spree. The predictions about what the various protocols have all come to pass recently. So I'm pretty proud of my streak there. But okay, going back to the topic, I think Morgan, you mentioned 4 different things that you thought were crucial for institutional adoption. One was a programmable virtual machine, and people have a lot of familiarity with the Ethereum virtual machine, and that's one of the main cornerstones of the evergreen push. The other one is KYC AML for users. So let's expand on that. How would that work? How does it work for an evergreen subnet? What do I do as a participant? What do I require of my users, and who else can I interact with? How does that whole thing work in overall in the big scheme?
So that's a really good question, because it's something that I had when I actually first joined Avalabs. When I was learning about Avalanche, I listened to actually a lot of you guys on podcasts and on videos, and read a lot of reports, and the terminology was always KYC at the chain level, and I'm like, what does that mean? What does that really mean? So it's awesome in that it is actually very malleable based on whatever the use case and institutional requirement is. So at the very simplest level, what it enables an institution to do is create a chain level allow list for, as an example, KYC'd clients. So if you are Citibank, as an example, you have already a bunch of retail clients that are KYC'd. So the idea would be for you to be able to create an allow list for those clients, that anytime any of those clients tries to interact with an application on your subnet or applications on your subnet, that wallet address is basically queried at the chain level. And what that allows you to do as an institution, frankly, whether it's a financial institution or any company building multiple applications on a subnet, is allow that querying to happen at the chain level, as opposed to the way that it's currently done in a lot of other chains and manifestations at the application level. And what this allows you to do as a deployer or builder on a subnet is really maintain that connectivity, that interoperability and composability and liquidity between different applications. So it's really allowing you to express the list of KYC'd clients or KYB'd institutional clients at the core tech level. And the one other thing that I would add that I think is really important and interesting, and not many people talk about, in the beginning, Luigi was describing the technical definition of subnets. Subnets can also be multiple blockchains within one subnet. So as an institution, you also have the ability to potentially have multiple chains based on different jurisdictional segmentations from a client standpoint, or different accreditor designations from a client standpoint. So there's a lot of different options, but it's basically something that allows you to express permissioning at the core tech level.
So let's ask some simple questions so everyone understands what's going on. So if I'm an institution, and I'm an American institution, and Luigi is a European institution, or actually make it different. Let's make it incompatible.
You'd love to be an Italian institution.
Well, yes, he would deep. That's why I went Europe. But let's imagine that it's Luigi DeMeo, and he's a Russian institution, and so he has a very different set of people who should be allowed to use his services. And I have a very different and conflicting version of who should be using my services. What do we do? Do subnets make some magic happen and bring us together? Or do we have a natural break here? What's the model here?
Go ahead, Luigi.
Yeah, so if you really want to do KYC either at the validator level or at the user level, basically what you do is you can actually restrict access for certain jurisdictions. This could be something that happens at the validator level of the subnet, or it can be something that happens at the contract deployer level of the subnet, or it can be something that happens at the user level of the subnet. So, right, those are three different, it's called admins or functions of the subnet. You can restrict what jurisdictions you want people to participate from. So if you're in the US and you don't want somebody to participate from Iran or whatever, something that's on a sanctioned list, you can actually prevent that. And many compliance departments of your company will actually make you do that. And that's something that's become quite obvious throughout this process with Morgan.
So that's a very strong answer, which says if there's a natural break, if there's some incompatibility, those people don't share the same subnet. Subnets are for those people to cooperate who have the same notion of jurisdiction. And so one of the natural boundaries then, at least as I hear what you're describing, is that jurisdictions like the United States, like Europe, etc., China, would have their own potential subnets that with laws and whatever regulations that apply to them differently. That is what you're describing to me is a way to take jurisdictional differences into account and create specific blockchains for different regimes.
What they and to maybe to add to that, what it really just allows you to do, and I think in some senses, some parts of the community kind of are have certain views in terms of KYCing certain individuals or not, and generally speaking, if you are a company that is building a subnet, subnets basically allow you to express ways to manage laws, rules, and regulations around compliance in a technical or technological way. So they're not saying just because this thing is on chain, you can obfuscate the laws, rules, and regulations that you have to abide by in your normal day-to-day business. It's just subnets give you a way to programmatically track it and express it.
Yeah, and as the DeFi guy here, I have to, bring it.
I set you up for that, Luigi.
Pull us all the way back, right? Like, just because this technology provides us this ability to actually limit access, restrict access, sort of customize jurisdictions, rules, laws, doesn't mean that that's the end state and the only state that everything will exist, right? I fully and firmly believe that there will also be a permissionless, sort of blockchain that will be public good for everybody in the world, for people that are infringed upon, oppressed upon. So that's basically the Avalanche C chain in a lot of ways, right? That's a permissionless network. Anybody can access.
Or Ethereum.
Yeah, or Ethereum. There are many of them now. And so I think it's important for people to understand that subnets are customizable when there's a use case that requests, desires, or needs it. But there are also, a subnet need not be permissioned. It could be completely permissionless as well.
I think now that you're going into this topic, maybe let's expand on this a little bit. What does any of this mean for the C chain? Is C chain going to be doing this? Are you going to need KYC to use the C chain? Is that what this means? Like tomorrow, I have to take out my driver's license and show it to someone. Like, is that what I'm hearing, or no?
No, not at all. I mean, the C chain is a permissionless network. It is completely open for basically anybody in the world to use, so long as they have internet connection. That is the future and promise of a blockchain. And frankly, I think the C chain benefits from the flourishing of subnets on Avalanche. C chain is the hub right now, the liquidity hub of Avalanche, right? So the more and more subnets that build really supports the C chain in two ways. Well, supports the primary network, but primarily the C chain. One, it increases the validator set, right? Because as you have more validators of subnets, you thus have more validators of the primary network, decentralizing the entire set. And Avalanche consensus was built to support something like this in particular. It's probably the only consensus that can do so. So that is one of the value adds. The second value add is, I always use this example of the Pikachu subnet, just because I love Pikachu. But basically, as you have these different games, institutional use cases, enterprise use cases, we also saw the SK subnet this week, which we could talk about too. As you start to have these new users come on board, they're going to naturally leverage the integrations from the C chain, like whether that's native USDC, USDT, whether that's BTC.B, whether that's Chainlink integrations or exchange integrations. They're going to leverage these things and want to pull and also leverage some of the stuff from the C chain, naturally building harder, longer term liquidity. That's your permissionless hub. So as the network grows, that grows.
Luigi, you should, so I always plug this, but Luigi wrote an awesome Substack about this earlier this year, describing really in like illustrative terms what this means, right? What this like seamless asset transfer and leveraging and interoperability from C chain, all those integrations on each C chain, like illustratively what that actually means, like what's the so what? Because oftentimes we talk about it in like theoretical terms, but I think it really does a good job of describing kind of what we're all excited for and what we're building toward.
One thing we should mention is really the Spruce initiative, because in a lot of ways, it combines both of these things, right? You have an evergreen subnet, right? So you have KYC at the chain level in particular. And you also have permissionless applications deploying on this subnet, right? And that's DeFi right now. So you take something like an Aave, you take something like Dexalot, all these applications that are permissionless smart contracts, and you don't need to change the application layer. They don't need to add on new KYC, or they don't need to get new audits. They can deploy their application as is onto a network that is KYC'd at the chain level. Prior to this, what everybody was trying to do was this idea of permissionless pools, where they tried to have KYC at the chain level for specific pools. And the problem with that is you end up having multiple different applications going down different KYC criteria. It ends up being quite fragmented, quite complicated, and nobody's on the same page. Here's a playground for DeFi, but with KYC at the chain level.
So for the techies watching, I think some of you might have heard about mandatory access controls versus discretionary access controls. So discretionary means you provide people the tools with which they can do any access control they like, but it's up to them. The onus is on them to come up with some kind of a coordinated approach. And we foresaw that that was going to be difficult. That if you were to leave all of the different users, the many, many millions of people who are using blockchains today, they will find it almost impossible. Well, evidently they find it impossible to coordinate and build a cohesive framework for sharing liquidity. And the other approach is to provide mandatory access controls at the chain level with the help of the validators. And then suddenly you have some kind of a uniformity of enforcement that allows different people to share the same chain, same liquidity pool, and that gets around the coordination problem without restricting choice. And I want to emphasize that. So if you don't like what's happening on Evergreen 1, then you could create Evergreen 2 with your own version of what it takes to be a member of Evergreen 2. And if you don't like that one, then there are infinitely many numbers to follow, 2, 3, 5, 4, 5, and so forth. So again, circling back, let's circle back and focus a little bit on, there are a couple of questions coming in from the audience. Morgan, you've spent a lot of time talking to institutions. How would you rate their level of sophistication when it comes to blockchain technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think this time around versus kind of the last cycle, to use the term, this time is different in that I think the more and more institutions you speak with, the more we find those that quote unquote get it. Even within the big groupings, within banks, within asset managers, within hedge funds, there's obviously a spectrum of how progressive they're being. And then those that are being really progressive, you see them publicly, right? Like the Franklin Templetons of the world, the Fidelities of the world, BlackRock touting the benefits of tokenization. So all that's to say is I think this time around, a lot of them recognize the benefits, the revolutionary capabilities of this underlying tech. Obviously, it's going to take a long time to overhaul financial services infrastructure that is literally layers of, like, as Luigi puts it, soup sandwich. But I think, it does feel that institutions are definitely kind of forging ahead with their respective initiatives, despite a lot of the developments over the past year, despite the regulatory environment. A lot of them are pushing ahead. They're doing a lot of education internally to their internal stakeholders, executive committees, board members, as well as their clients, to say, hey, this is like the hype, or this is the stuff with the industry that's wrong, but this is very different than the underlying tech that a lot of them are working to kind of to push forward. So all that's to say is I've actually been very pleasantly surprised in finding those institutional partners that get it and are forging ahead.
Yeah, I think I've been on some meetings with you, and I've been incredibly impressed by the sophistication of the parties at the table. So things that, I think in my time in this space goes back a long, long ways. And I remember having to explain to people how these things work and getting this like befuddled expression back. And, and then they start asking questions about words they picked up here and there, like what's a hash? And then you're like, oh God.
What's a nonce?
So you've seen the progression, right?
It's been insane, right? It's like, I remember where we started and we had to explain every basic concept and then also all these concepts that they should never have heard about. If you have to describe what a nonce is or what a one-way hash function is, you've lost the game already. That adoption is not going to take place for another 5 years. So I think in the recent cycle, in the last 2 years, I've seen nothing but sophistication from the players at the table myself, and it's been wonderful. What do you think has been the biggest impediment to adoption? Well, both of you.
Yeah, go ahead, Luigi. I'm happy to add on.
I mean, it's quite clearly, at least in the U.S., it's really the regulatory environment. I've been pleasantly surprised the desire and willingness for many to do some, but a lot of them, as I mentioned before, like have to compensate for the regulatory environment. And when they do that, they end up killing what they actually were trying to build or trying to do. And it ends up being, some sort of miniature version of what they were actually looking to do. So that's a big impediment in general. I would say the tech is no longer an impediment where that was last cycle in particular. Now it's not. And one other thing in particular with institutional capital markets, like DeFi has really inspired them in a lot of ways. Like that was something that completely was missing last time. They didn't know what to do. They were all just like, oh, should we just like make a database? Now it's like, oh, wow, like we can do intraday repo, or can we do some complex structured credit transactions? Or how can we, save hundreds of millions of dollars by no longer needing to actually do paper conference for all these transactions? So there's a lot where they see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what I was kind of referring to when I say, they realize that there are kind of greater kind of revolutionary capabilities. I think to your point, Luigi, because of the advent of DeFi, which we have now from an institutional standpoint retermed as on-chain finance or on-fi, which seems to resonate a lot more with institutions. But I think also from a hurdle standpoint, yeah, you're right. It is the regulatory environment writ large that I think has been challenging. And it's been a lot of work with institutions to kind of address the concerns that they may have from a subnet capability standpoint to say, hey, you can still kind of own this environment and, not be on the public permissionless chain. And so I think that kind of goes back to also the educational piece, which is it's a really kind of high touch approach, trusted advisor type of approach, where we're going meeting by meeting with institutions where they come with us and they'll say, hey, this came up in this meeting. How do we address this? This came up in this. Can you help me kind of address this internally? So it's been much more collaborative than just, no, we can't do this.
Mm-hmm. So let's maybe, we don't have too much time left. So I want to cover all the bases. Let's talk a little bit about Spruce. Let's talk a little bit about more evergreen trees. And can you situate us? Can you define what Spruce is and what other trees might follow after that?
Sure. So at a high level, so Spruce is a testnet, and it is a type of evergreen, right? So it has a lot of all of the kind of features that what we talked about earlier as it relates to evergreen embedded into it, right? So there's an allow list at the user level. All the institutions have gone through an onboarding process, and that is the thing. Their wallets are embedded into the allow list at the chain level. There is a permission validator set. There is a custom gas token, which is a test net stablecoin, and then it's obviously EVM based. So all of those things are like, the table stakes for this evergreen subnet. What is the purpose of it? The purpose of this testnet was really to create a low risk, low barrier to entry, controlled environment for major traditional buy and sell side institutions. So everyone from banks to asset managers, hedge funds, and others to come in and really start dipping their toe into what it feels like to be on chain and to use these DeFi protocols that Luigi referenced to examine concretely what it feels like to trade traditional assets and compare what this looks like on chain to the legacy ways of working, the traditional ways of doing things, and really start, experimenting with and seeing, hey, this is what this looks like. This is what this end-to-end user flow looks like in the traditional world. This is what it looks like on chain using Aave. Is there an efficiency to be realized? Is there a cost savings to be realized? And the answer could be yes or no, but it's really to kind of go through that kind of end-to-end workflow and start really kind of getting to the nuts and bolts of experimenting with this tech, as well as with the idea of, potentially building applications on top of each other, right? And really kind of, bearing the fruits of composable DeFi. Because a lot of this is a generalization, but a lot of what we read is like very theoretical. Like, it'd be cool if someone did this using this, but this environment allows them to actually, experiment with it in a concrete way. And I think, initially a lot of the institutions were interested in dealing with assets or focusing on assets that are more of like, on the more conservative side, let's say, of the broader security spectrum. So FX, which are obviously not securities. So trading using certain applications to trade euro dollar as an example. Doing other things like interest rate swaps using a protocol called Volts. And then as more and more institutions join, as the initiative will progress, others have expressed interest in trading and using certain products like tokenized, private market securities as collateral in DeFi. So that's obviously something that we've all been talking about, but this environment basically allows them to kind of operationalize that.
Yeah, I think one thing that's worth noting is like DeFi is really good for one important thing, especially as it relates to TradFi. It allows for atomic transactions without an intermediary. That's something that does not exist in TradFi. It's just not possible, frankly. And to the extent that we can work with the most sophisticated finance minds out there to actually bring this technology further to serve two purposes. One, for the DeFi builders, right? They love this feedback because a lot of them are techies, a lot of them are engineers, a lot of them are not so focused on some of the complex derivatives math. It doesn't need to be reinvented, frankly. What they need to understand is how these institutions want to use these products. And, I think that's valuable for the DeFi builders, but for the actual institutions, it's for them to understand, okay, like what is actually possible here? How can I use an AMM or a central limit order book where there's nobody in the middle, and how can I actually change my whole business model because of that? I think they're still like wowed by that, frankly. And now once they use it like with their own hands and they have their traders like start to understand like new different things open up. So there's efficiencies gained from an operational perspective, but there's new businesses that nobody's thought of yet, or new products nobody's thought of yet as well.
How do I create an account with Trader Joe or Dexalot? Right.
You'd be surprised how many of the institutions ask those questions. Actually,
that's a fair
question.
Also,
there's some that I won't name names, but there's some that are very familiar. So.
Oh yeah. Some yes. I've been there where they've already arbitraged the MEV extraction from Ethereum all day, essentially. So hang on. So in general, when you talk to these institutions, are they aware of the unique advantages of the Avalanche platform? Are they clued in to what it is that makes Avalanche different?
I'd like to think so, since we've spent like 10 months with.
No. When you start, how about that?
No. But all that's to say, so I think I'd say two things on that front. In the first instance, more and more institutions come to these introductory conversations with a base level awareness of Avalanche. So that I think is very promising and exciting, especially given how in the grand scheme of things, Avalanche is still a relatively new platform. And I think that, a lot of them over time, part of the reason why, in some cases, when you come and you talk to them, you talk about the differences, there might not be like an imminent use case or an imminent product or project to collaborate on. But what's really kind of been exciting and promising is that, after cultivating a lot of these relationships for months and months and months, we're finally starting to see different institutional players in the space come to us and say, hey, we want an evergreen subnet. We know we want to use Avalanche for this next phase of our project because of all the things that we've learned, of all the things that we've experimented with. Like, we know Avalanche is like, so it's definitely been like a journey, but I guess my point is that institutional awareness has definitely increased and obviously, hopefully is set to continue to increase and pan out.
I think one thing I will add to that is I have noticed that like they now understand it deeper, and now like sort of the only thing that we need to assist with and like we still need to explain is some of the differences between some of these platforms, because a lot of it gets muddled together and blurry, right? You'd be surprised how many institutions actually read crypto Twitter. You'd be shocked, actually. But explain once they start to understand that, like, okay, so I can have my own subnet, and there can be another institution with its own subnet, and then there could be one subnet with all the institutions, and we can all talk to each other with only our validators being involved. That's when like their minds are a little blown, because like not only do you have to get them comfortable with the idea of the security of their network, but like in the old form or fashion in other networks, you also have to get them comfortable with the idea of third-party bridge providers who are exogenous to that network, right? So now you have two trust assumptions that are completely different. Here you have the validators of the network whom you've already entrusted as some component, and then now you only need to trust who you were trying to send messages to. That's an innovation that doesn't exist in some other networks out there.
I want to expand on this. So what makes that possible on Avalanche?
Avalanche warp messaging, AWM, and also the primary network architecture, which is what allowed it to happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And in fact, when we started, I did not understand the importance of that messaging feature, actually, to be honest. We started out thinking that bridging would be sufficient. And that's one of the few technical calls, that I think I kind of blew it. And but didn't blow it for too long. And we have one of the fastest messaging primitives around now, and lightest weight. Actually, being lighter weight is more important than being fast in this game. And we have one of the lightest weight messaging primitives, and I'm thrilled about what they can do. And I think the end result is exactly what you said. You create your subnet, somebody else creates their subnet, and now you can connect them. And that connection is done according to your rules, according to your needs. Need not be there if you don't want it. It can be there to any other set of subnets that you like. It's just like connecting the internet together. I think a lot of these people in the sort of institutional world, they don't have a tech background. But those of the people who are listening with a tech background, they know exactly how this was, right? A lot of people lived through this in the 80s and 90s, where we had local area networks that we would connect together into internets, and that's exactly what subnets allow you to do.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, the other component that they actually bring to us that's quite interesting is that this communication protocol that we've designed in a lot of ways is different than others because of the primary network architecture, right? It's more lightweight, as you mentioned. Other networks, like every validator needs to independently store everything. And here, that's not really the case, right? So it's a lot less overhead, which is something that they're very interested in.
Right, and we did not jam any component into anyone's path in order to monetize, in order to do whatever else. So they need not travel across a hub. They need not convert any of their assets into AVAX to transfer them, etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of architectural choices we made that in order to provide the greatest flexibility to the users. I think that's played a key role in the success of subnets. But let me pick up a couple more questions. Maybe we do rapid fire. Let's see. I'm going to save this one for last. So which verticals do you feel have the most to gain from using blockchain tech? Institutional verticals.
Which institutional verticals? I mean, I think that's a good question. I think
I have my thoughts.
Well, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say the intermediaries.
I think the buy side has the most to gain in a lot of ways, because a lot of the intermediaries are not the buy side. They are in current TradFi, they're technology providers who basically create a middleware and extract some rent for being that middleware. They don't stand to benefit in a lot of ways. And then in some respects, some of the sell side doesn't, will have to shift some of their businesses, in my opinion. Like one simple example I like to give is like, if you think about a simple AMM model, right? Traditionally, market making was done by the sell side. It can still happen in the AMM model, but what you can also introduce is corporate treasuries to be liquidity providers without needing to give their money to somebody else to intermediate the trade. That no longer has to happen. And that's a big difference of the model.
I mean, in particular, those from the sell side market making standpoint, particularly in those instances where you're market making very illiquid or more liquid securities, generally those are the ones that have the higher frictions and the higher spreads embedded as well. And any efficiency gain there will generally benefit the buy side, the customer, and shrink spreads and, how do I phrase it? Disentangle or efficiently intermediate some of the incumbents. So I think
that's the nice way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly. So I would agree with Luigi on that. And I do say, just the last point is that I think Luigi and I share a common view on this, is that we've always believed that banks will move and funds will move when their clients demand that they move, basically, that they support a service, that they support some asset. That's generally when they feel kind of not only the pressure, but like the commercial imperative to kind of make that change as well. And frankly, even with the example of Spruce, like we've kind of seen that as well.
Great. And I'm not an insider to these circles. I come from a tech background, but what I heard you say, both of you, using fancier words, is you're going to make the world a better place for the end user. That's the thing that's going to actually move the needle. And that's a nice uplifting message. Before we wrap up, another question. So when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'd like to take part in this blockchain stuff. I'd like to issue my own chain. I'd like to digitize some tokens. I'd like to have some DeFi services on there." What kinds of DeFi services are they talking about? Do they want an empty blank chain? If not, what do they want to see on it?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on kind of who the institution is and where they're at on their blockchain/digital asset journeys. So to be honest, it just depends, and we see everything. We see everything from, we have this very specific use case that either we've deployed elsewhere and want to transfer here, or that we have been testing and we want to deploy it, so we want our own evergreen, to, we want to test out this environment, so let's join Spruce and kind of test out the different options that are on there. So it really kind of runs the gamut. From an evergreen standpoint, I think what's actually really resonated with them is, frankly, the launch of AvaCloud. The fact that a lot of them, to your point, they may not have as many resources on the kind of blockchain infrastructure and development side. And so to hear that there is potentially a service or a partner that can kind of handle a lot of that for them, and they instead can kind of focus on the application, it has been really resonating, I think, with them. So I think, in this way, they don't necessarily have to focus on building and maintaining the blockchain.
What does AvaCloud do for institutional players?
So for them, it really, again, it kind of like allows them to really focus on the use case that's sitting on top of the blockchain, and all of the other kind of blockchain infrastructure and components are taken care of for them. So whether that's things like block explorers, RPC endpoints, managed validator service, a lot of this stuff, at least now, they don't want to, care to, can deal with it, and instead kind of this service or this infrastructure provision allows them to instead really focus on that. I think down the line, it'd be awesome to see a future where they're increasingly so familiar with it that they use it as a tool to just like 5-click deploy something. But right now, a lot of our engagements are kind of, again, very high touch, very advisory in nature, and so it allows them to have this partner really kind of standing up their own blockchain environment.
Luigi, do you want to? Oh, I should mention, by the way, that AvaCloud gives them validators, a wallet, and an explorer to start with, and potentially pre-populates the chain with other services that they might want, such as services provided by third parties like AMMs, like DEXs, like lending applications, and so on. Right?
Yeah. Sorry. No, I was going to say, like, I think the vision is becoming clearer and clearer by the day, and that is one where you'll be able to spin up your own blockchain with your own customized features at a whim, right? It'll be like, maybe even better, but like an AWS instance, right? You go over to the DevOps team, I want you to spin this up, we want to use this, etc. And that's how I think this is going to transpire. There are other considerations with blockchains, but there were also other considerations with cloud versus previous infrastructure. And I just think that's going to become very familiar over time.
Okay, last question. What has been the most surprising finding after all of these discussions with institutions? What have you learned? Maybe not the most surprising. What have you learned? What has been the biggest lesson learned?
So I have my view. I come from TradFi, where I was working in a very large bank with, just like any large company, frankly, a lot of layers of governance and stakeholder buy-in. So I knew that working with institutions would obviously not be an overnight phenomenon. It takes a lot of buy-in and hand-holding. But all that's to say is, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, is I've been very pleasantly surprised with how many of our partners that we've found that really get it and that are pushing the envelope and pushing ahead. So I'm a realist. So I enter all of my discussions with, just a large dose of reality. And I'll say that my expectations have really been surprised to the upside in that way.
Great to hear. Luigi?
There's a lot there. So Morgan and I did overlap at Citigroup. So we both have a TradFi background. I've been in the crypto space for a good amount of time now, I'd say. So it's a little different. But what I've really walked away from is I didn't have to convince anybody about crypto or about blockchains in general. Like, that wasn't what the conversation was about. I think most people from the outside would assume we were like, this is why you should use a blockchain. Like, that is not the conversation where that was.
Ask me that too sometimes. They're like, how do you convince banks to use blockchain? I'm like, I don't.
Yeah. That's not the question. The question is more of like, hey, we really want to get started with this. Like, this is what we want to try and do. Like, what are some good ways that we can attempt it? How can we use this protocol to try and modify it and be able to achieve like repo transactions? Like, they're actually much more advanced and much more like, you would be surprised how many of them are personal users of these systems. And that was pretty cool to realize, like, oh, I remember when I used Trader Joe this time, or I remember when I used, Aave, or I remember when I used, like, so they've all used these protocols. And I think that was a light bulb for a lot of them.
Fantastic. Okay, well, so I think we're almost, we are running out of time. I added some extra time because of the technical difficulties there. But let's wrap up. And so let's see. I guess the last question is, any parting thoughts for people who are thinking about institutional adoption in general, what it means for blockchains going forward, anything sort of in the big picture that we may have missed during our discussion?
From my standpoint, I think we covered a lot. I'm just very excited for the community to kind of see a lot of the output, a lot of the stuff that we've been working on kind of behind the scenes and in the pipeline. So really kind of demonstrating out, what are actually the capabilities or the manifestations of the capabilities of AWM, like to see that in action, right? And to see in action some of these, things that we're doing on Spruce and all these things, like finally kind of coming to fruition and really kind of sharing with the community the findings and the so what of it all. So I would say stay tuned on that. And it's definitely something that's been and continues to be a long time in the making, but I'm definitely excited to kind of continuing to see these things come to fruition.
Yeah, I think for me, what I'm really looking forward to, and what I'm really want people to part with, is that there are going to be multiple facets of how blockchain technologies will be part of our lives in the future. And it's okay for them to be around for different use cases. I think people that can become okay with that in their mind and feel very rid of some of the baggage will be very happy in the future, right? This is a technology. Approach it from that standpoint, and you'll be able to build really good use cases. And at the end of the day, if we can build really good use cases over the next few years, it'll be very clear to everybody around the world that like this is no longer this is some niche fringe industry. It's like this is some tech, and it's good and it works.
Great note to end on. Thank you both. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Luigi. And folks, there you heard it from two of the most prominent people, the most foremost people in the space of institutional adoption of blockchains. I actually thought a little bit about whether or not we should hold this at all. As you all know, we're one of the most copied chains. People do asinine things, like take something like the word subnet, chop it up, and come up with something that sounds very similar, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I'm talking about supernets, et cetera, of course. And so there are a whole bunch of things that people do. We're very, very copied. And I thought, well, are we going to be giving away, in response to reader questions, all sorts of insights, et cetera, that help other people? But this is a funny game. It's a game of relationships. It's a game of deeply understanding the area. And it's a game that really weeds out those people who are superficial. It's a game that the institutional blockchain game is one that weeds out people who are just driving by, passing through, and doing things that create a Potemkin village. These are all actual institutional efforts that are deep, that relate to large numbers of potential users with legitimate use cases, unassailable use cases. And this conversation that we're having, we didn't have a chance to really go into the backstory, but it's happening at a time when another institutional subnet just got deployed. Based in South Korea, there's an SK Planet subnet, and it just brought in, I forget what the numbers are, but I think it's in excess of 50,000 actual users. These are actually not just addressees on chain. They're actual users validated by the participating organizations. And it's about to bring in about 300,000 potentially merchants that actually use the points on that network, the points that are used for buying and selling things. So this is happening. And all of you heard me talk about subnets and how they help Avalanche scale. And this is happening at a scale that's unprecedented and without impacting any of the main things that we all know Avalanche to do. The C chain remains unaffected. It's completely outside of all of this stuff, and it does what it does. So it's a really, really exciting world that we're moving into. We heard all sorts of things in crypto Twitter, and a whole bunch of narratives got floated around, and many of them found traction among a bunch of people with essentially no credentials except other than making noise on crypto Twitter. So remember the shared security narrative and how certain chains out there are limited in how many chains they can support. Whereas Avalanche is unlimited. We can create as many subnets as there are use cases. So as I look forward, I see a universe with lots and lots of exciting use cases. And I harped on this before, but I'll harp on it again. The chains that succeed in the long term are going to be the ones that have the right architecture to absorb that growth. And I think you got a glimpse of where that growth might go with institutional adoption. And in the weeks to come, we're going to go back to gaming. We're going to go back to NFTs. We're going to go back to DeFi applications and all sorts of other things where other people are deploying both new apps on the existing chains as well as creating their own subnets. So with that, let's wrap up for today. Have a wonderful weekend and see you all on chain.
Cheers.
Thanks very much. Bye.